Over the course of events that took place in Volume 7, there were a few interesting changes in some of the characters that we had come to know. Some of them more positive in nature, like Crow giving up his alcoholism, or Penny not only returning to the RWBY series, but getting more in touch with her human emotions. And then there were some that were certainly more negative shifts in character, like Winter losing touch with some of her human emotions, and Ironwood seeming to lose touch with pretty much everything around him. In fact, I would argue Ironwood's shift in character is the largest we've seen out of any character that we've encountered in the RWBY series as a whole thus far. Barring, of course, Salem herself and everything we saw in The Lost Fable. You know, going from a seemingly innocent girl trapped in a tower to the literal harbinger of death that's plaguing the entire world. Can't really get more drastic than that, but in the realm of the mortals, I would argue that Ironwood is the greatest shift we've seen thus far. And will only progress further down that path in the course of Volume 8, though I do think he will snap out of it at some point, and I'll explain that a bit later on. Now, Ironwood's shift in Volume 7 was quite drastic, going from someone who at the beginning of the volume wanted to protect everyone and was doing everything he could to do so, trying to unite the world against Salem, was a person open to hearing other people's advice, that of Team RWBY, that of Team Juniper, and was seeking the advice of Ozpin, now knowing that he had reincarnated in Oscar. But by the end of the volume, he had become someone who would not listen to others at all, and only had one goal in mind that he would try to accomplish by any means necessary. And anyone who even so much as spoke out against him was deemed a threat worthy of being eliminated, as we saw when he shot Oscar with the intent to kill him. As I said, he was seeking Ozpin's advice at the beginning of the volume, and now killing his reincarnation by the end of it, or intending to at the very least. A very drastic shift in character. And there were numerous reasons for this to occur. Well, first and foremost, he was shouldering a lot by the time we had first seen him in Volume 7. He was the head of the Atlas military, and held pretty much unanimous power in the Atlas Council, which pretty much gave him control over Atlas, and he was essentially the authority figure over one of the 4 great kingdoms in all of Remnant. So yeah, there was a lot of pressure put on his shoulders. Even at the beginning of the volume, people were remarking that he was looking very tired, like he had been shouldering a lot. He already had a lot of people against him for the embargo and other things he was trying to put in place to protect the people. But then, of course, Salem's faction started interfering, with Tyrion and Watts starting to cause problems, Jacques' interference as well, just adding onto his plate, and then Salem showed up herself, not to mention finding out Salem can't be killed. A lot of those factors drove him to the point where, okay, the only goal that matters right now is saving the relics and making sure Salem doesn't get them. Defeating Salem isn't on the table anymore. Just protect the relics and live. That's winning now in his books. But I think the most prominent factor that went into all of this is Ironwood's semblance, that being the driving factor for a lot of his decisions. For those who didn't know, Ironwood's semblance is called Mettle. It is essentially a form of iron will. It strengthens Ironwood's resolve in his decisions and allows him to carry through with them. Almost to a fault. In fact, I think to a fault, because it seems very much like a double-edged sword. We found out Ironwood's semblance in the RWBY panel that took place for RTX Online back in September, so this isn't a spoiler for Volume 8 or anything like that. In fact, I'm not going to be discussing anything that has taken place in Episode 1 of Volume 8 thus far, so no worries on that. But with Ironwood's semblance, it is a passive semblance, meaning that it is active always, just like Crow's misfortune. It is always present, so every decision that Ironwood makes, he is a bit more steadfast in than others would be. He already has a strong will, just first and foremost, as it was confirmed by Eddie Rivas that when Ironwood's aura was broken, his semblance was not active, and yet Ironwood still had the willpower to resolve himself, to pull his arm out of the hard light dust barrier, and pretty much sacrifice it to achieve his goals. So Ironwood does have a lot of willpower on his own, but his semblance enforces that even more so. I've seen a lot of people argue that, well, his semblance just sounds like an added personality trait, but I think it is much more powerful than that. Ironwood's semblance allows him to stand strong on any decision that he makes to the point of committing atrocities to achieve it, something that would cause a lot of people to waver. If everyone stood against them, there would be a lot of people who would back down. Ironwood, because of his semblance, is one who will not back down, and that's what's causing all of the problems now. We saw the turning point in Volume 7 when his semblance activated and Ironwood, I think, resolved himself a little bit too much in his goal, or perhaps just as much as he wanted to. When the Seer Grim shattered and that ghostly image of Salem appeared, we saw Ironwood was terrified. But then, when Salem told him to surrender, we saw his entire attitude change. He went from fear to being steadfast and strong, and told her straight up that is not going to happen. He didn't flinch after that, and was completely cold to everyone after that point. Because of Salem's words, Ironwood made the decision that she cannot get the relics at any cost. Not necessarily that Atlas needs to be protected at any cost. I think even Atlas right now is just an added effect of Salem can't get the relics, and the relics right now, or at least the relic of creation, is holding Atlas up. So therefore, Salem can't get Atlas. But the second that the relic is removed from the vault, I think Ironwood is just going to shift to protecting the relic at all costs. But that was the turning point. That conversation that Salem had with Ironwood was the turning point in his character, and it was because of his semblance, how he made his semblance, or activated it, to harden his emotions to everything else around him and focus on that one goal. This is something that's going to continue to push him further and further away from anyone that he considers allies, because he will not listen to anything that they have to say. He is only driven to that one goal and can only see his own perspective. Ironwood himself hasn't really been the most trustworthy person throughout the entire RWBY series, largely in part because of his semblance. In fact, one of the first things Ironwood did when we met him, sure, he was introduced as a member of Ozpin's inner circle, a headmaster of the academy, someone Ozpin trusted, and yet he pretty much immediately usurped control of the entire Vital Festival tournament from Ozpin by going to the Vale Council. Likely this was in part because of Ironwood's semblance passively influencing the decision he had made to bring his military and try to protect the festival from anything that outward forces might want to do. I don't know if he was expecting a direct attack from Salem or her forces at that time, or an attack on the academy, but yeah. Essentially, I think his semblance influences, well, every decision that he makes, because it's a passive semblance, but the major decisions that he makes, he's a bit more steadfast in than others, and this one is no different. His character progression throughout the course of Volume 7 is certainly something I didn't expect going into it. However, looking into what he is in universe, what his soul has manifested as his semblance, this is a logical conclusion for where his character is going. And because of how resolved he is in his decision, his semblance is forcing his perspective to be where it is. And I think if and when his aura is broken again and his semblance deactivates for even just a brief moment, he's going to snap out of it, have that moment of clarity, and realize all of the things he will have done up until that point, thinking that there is no redemption for him. That is the point where he will make his ultimate sacrifice, at least in my mind. Ironwood is a tragic character, not necessarily because of the fall of his character as a whole, but because of the way his soul has manifested his semblance. I would argue he's almost more cursed than Crow. Crow, with his misfortune, still has control over his actions, but Ironwood, you have to wonder if he has a passing thought, makes a decision on a whim. If his semblance activates or is like Crow's, where it has spikes and lows, could he become so resolved in a passing thought that he can't change his mind until he's snapped out of it forcefully? Like, this semblance seems to me to have a lot of downside. It's likely because of his semblance that Ironwood is where he is, at the general of the Atlas military. He wouldn't have been able to get there without great resolve and discipline, and his semblance surely helped him with that. But now that he's in that position, his decisions carry a lot more weight. And if he's a lot more steadfast in those decisions, which, yes, as a general, it is useful to be steadfast in your decisions, but In cases such as this, where there are millions of lives at stake, or however many lives there are in Atlas and Mantle, I'm not sure if millions is the right number, probably hundreds of thousands, because I'm guessing Remnant's population is nowhere near the population of our world, because, you know, it's plagued by monsters, and the amount of settlements in Remnant is much less than ours. I'm getting a bit off topic here, but still, Ironwood, his decisions carry a lot more weight, and with the way things are progressing and his focus on this singular goal, all lives outside of that goal are meaningless. Meaning he is becoming a villain, or has become one already. He's going to sacrifice anything and everything to try to protect these relics from Salem, and everyone else is going to become his enemy. This will lead to his downfall, and ultimately, I believe, his demise. I think he will have that moment of clarity before the end, when his aura is broken, his semblance deactivates, and he realizes all the things he's done, but until that time, I think his semblance is going to stay active, and he's only going to become more and more resolved in this decision, as at this point he feels he has nothing left. This is a fault of Ironwood for deciding and choosing to do the things he's doing, but also it's partly not. It's partly due to the cruelty of fate, that this ended up being his semblance, that he has become reliant on it. Much like Clover was reliant on his good fortune, Ironwood might be relying a bit too much on his semblance, that he is using this to bolster his own resolve and has now pushed him down this path a little too far. But let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. What do you think of Ironwood's semblance? Do you think it works in the way that I've described it, or do you think it works a bit differently? It's a bit of a difficult concept to wrap one's head around, that the decisions that you made could be forcefully resolved within your own mind, even more so. But with Ironwood having a passive semblance and resolving his own decisions, it brings in the question of how much it affects Ironwood's free will, whether passing decisions could be enforced much more so than he would initially intend or want to overall. A passive semblance works in unexpected ways in the RWBY series, and I intend to have a discussion on passive semblances in general in the future, but still, let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and I'm really curious to know what you guys think. If you guys enjoyed this video, want to see more theories and analyses like it, make sure to subscribe and join the Guild of the Eternal Flame. Tweet me at PhoenixKnight7, and I'll see you guys in the next video.